This is Monica Perez, and we are starting a new book today. We just finished Report from Iron Mountain. I had a great conversation with Scott and William about that. You'll have to go to the History Homos podcast to listen to that. It's free, and I think it's commercial free also. So that was very fun. I always like when they help me wrap a book up. And I'll put it out as a highlight reel for premium listeners, but you can get it free on History Homos. So the book I want to do today is very short, seminal work by Frédéric Bastiat. Blake is already saying one of the best books ever written. A must read for all humans, and it's always a hot girl summer when Monica's around. Thank you. I'm working my best on that. So I absolutely agree with Blake on all scores, of course, but one of the best books ever written. And anybody who's listened to my show has heard or listens regularly has probably heard me say about when I discovered this book. I was super excited. I just was going through the entire basically Mises catalog, like the Mises Institute catalog, audiobooks, everything. I had everything. And I was just blowing through it. It's before I had a radio show, so I could just absorb instead. I didn't have to synthesize and distribute. I just absorbed stuff. And when I read it, it so resonated with everything I had learned from my father growing up, but he was already dead. So I called my aunt, his sister, who was very like-minded, my Aunt Margaret, and I had to tell her she would just absolutely love this book. So you probably heard this before. I'm not sure I can still do her accent. When she first got married, she lived in the projects in Brooklyn, but she became an English teacher and she ended up talking like Katharine Hepburn. It was the craziest thing. Smoked filterless Pall Mall, I believe. So she quit smoking when she was 60. She lived till she was 95. But I said, "Oh, Aunt Margaret, I have to tell you this book. Oh my gosh, you will love it. The Law by Frédéric Bastiat." And she said, you just hear her go, "Monica, my dear girl, on our 12th birthday, Daddy gave each and every one of us children that book, and we were expected to read it." And I was like, okay. And then I realized, of course, like they say there's inherited trauma. I inherited that. Like the reason it resonated with me is that my father read it when he was 12 years old. So anyway, I realized I probably gave my copy away right before the show. I was like, where's the book? Bazine says, even though the scholar is French, he is utterly overlooked in France. No one knows this person. If this is the same introduction that I remember from my copy, because I had to pull up a PDF, it will explain. So it gives you a very interesting little background here. There's a short introduction. The introduction is written by Tom DiLorenzo, who wrote the book, if I recall correctly, The Real Lincoln, which opened my eyes. I mean, I, of course, never approved of the Civil War on a constitutional basis and the things Lincoln did, but it was a really good book. And since I talked to Perloff about his Lincoln book, and I'm going to talk to Wheezy about his Lincoln ideas, I think it's fun to give Tom DiLorenzo a little shout out. Okay, so The Law, Frédéric Bastiat. Let's see what it says. Okay, the forward is, anyone building a personal library of liberty must include in it a copy of Frédéric Bastiat's classic essay, The Law. First published in 1850 by the great French economist and journalist, it is as clear a statement as has ever been made of the original American ideal of government, as proclaimed in the Declaration of Independence, that the main purpose of any government is the protection of the lives, liberties, and property of its citizens. Bastiat believed that all human beings possessed the God-given natural rights of individuality, liberty, property. "This is man," he wrote. "These, quote, 3 gifts from God precede all human legislation." But even in his time, writing in the late 1840s, Bastiat was alarmed over how the law had been perverted into, that's a quote, into an instrument of what he called legal plunder. Far from protecting individual rights, the law was increasingly used to deprive one group of citizens of those rights for the benefit of another group, and especially for the benefit of the state itself. He condemned the legal plunder of protectionist tariffs, government subsidies of all kinds, progressive taxation, public schools, government, quote, jobs programs, minimum wage laws, welfare, usury laws, and more. Bastiat's warnings of the dire effects of legal plunder are as relevant today as they were the day he first issued them. The system of legal plunder, which many now celebrate as, quote, democracy, will erase from everyone's conscience, he wrote, the distinction between justice and injustice. The plundered classes will eventually figure out how to enter the political game and plunder their fellow man. Legislation will never be guided by any principles of justice, but only by brute police force. The great French champion of liberty also forecast the corruption of education by the state. Those who held, quote, government-endowed teaching positions, he wrote, would rarely criticize legal plunder lest their government endowments be ended. The system of legal plunder would also greatly exaggerate the importance of politics in society. Man, right on. I mean, this guy is right on. And this is Di Lorenzo summarizing it. That would be a most unhealthy development, as it would encourage even more citizens to seek to improve their own well-being, not by producing goods and services for the marketplace, but by plundering their fellow citizens through politics. Bastiat was also wise enough to anticipate what modern economists call rent-seeking and rent avoidance behavior. These two clumsy phrases refer respectively to the phenomena of lobbying for political favors, legal plunder, and of engaging in political activity directed at protecting oneself from being the victim of plunder seekers. For example, the steel manufacturing industry lobbies for high tariffs on steel, whereas steel using industries like the automobile industry can be expected to lobby against high tariffs on steel. The reason why modern economists... Okay, I got to get the door. Hold on a second. Arturo has been banned. I got rid of the person at the door. Dang, that was super annoying. Sorry. Okay, so here we go. All right. The reason why modern economists are concerned about rent seeking is the opportunity cost involved. The more time, effort, and money that is spent by businesses on conniving to manipulate politics, merely transferring wealth, the less time is spent on producing goods and services, which increases wealth. Thus, legal plunder impoverishes the entire society, despite the fact that a small but politically influential part of the society benefits from it. It is remarkable in reading the law how perfectly accurate Bastiat was in describing the statists of his day, which it turns out were not much different from the statists of today or any other day. The French socialists of Bastiat's day espoused doctrines that perverted charity, education, and morals, for one thing. True charity does not begin with the robbery of taxation, he pointed out. Government schooling is inevitably an exercise in statist brainwashing, not genuine education, and it is hardly, quote, moral for a large gang, government, to legally, rob one segment of the population, keep most of the loot, and share a little of it with various needy individuals. Socialists want to play God, Bastiat observed, anticipating all the future tyrants and despots of the world who would try to remake the world in their image, whether that image would be communism, fascism, the glorious union, or global democracy. Bastiat also observed that socialists wanted forced conformity, rigid regimentation of the population through pervasive regulation, forced equality of wealth, and dictatorship. As such, they were the mortal enemies of liberty. Dictatorship need not involve an actual dictator. All that was needed, said Bastiat, was the laws enacted by a Congress or a parliament that would achieve the same effect: forced conformity. Wow. This guy really was ahead of his time, or in his time, and we are still, nothing changes. Bastiat was also wise to point out that the world has far too many, quote, great men, fathers of their countries, etc., who in reality are usually nothing but petty tyrants with a sick and compulsive desire to rule over others. The defenders of the free society should have a healthy disrespect for all such men. Bastiat admired America and pointed to the America of 1850 as being as close as any society in the world to his ideal of a government that protected individual rights to life, liberty, and property. There were two major exceptions, however: the twin evils of slavery and protectionist tariffs. Twin evils. Frédéric Bastiat died on Christmas Eve, 1850, and did not live to observe the convulsions that the America he admired so much would go through in the next 15 years and longer. It is unlikely that he would have considered the U.S. government's military invasion of the southern states in 1861, the killing of some 300,000 citizens, and the bombing, burning, and plundering of the region's cities, towns, farms, and businesses as being consistent in any way with the protection of the lives, liberties, and properties of those citizens as promised by the Declaration of Independence. Had he lived to see all of this, he most likely would have added, quote, legal murder to legal plunder as one of the two great sins of government. He would likely have viewed the post-war Republican Party with its 50% average tariff rates, wow, its massive corporate welfare schemes, and its 25-year campaign of genocide against the Plains Indians as first-rate plunderers and traitors to the American ideal. In the latter pages of the law, Bastiat offers the sage advice that what was really needed was, quote, a science of economics. All right. We're gonna have to get him, see how he defends that. That would explain the harmony or lack thereof of a free society as opposed to socialism. I love economics and I think that it's sound. It gets weaponized, however. He made a major contribution to this end himself with the publication of his book, Economic Harmonies, which can be construed as a precursor to the modern literature of the Austrian School of Economics. There is no substitute for a solid understanding of the market order and of the realities of politics when it comes to combating the kinds of destructive socialistic schemes that plagued Bastiat's day as well as ours. Anyone who reads this great essay, along with other free market classics such as Henry Hazlitt's Economics in One Lesson. Ooh, I want to read that. I mean, I have read it. We should read that again. I'll check the copyright. I don't want problems. And Murray Rothbard's Power and Market will possess enough intellectual ammunition to debunk the socialist fantasies of this or any other day. Maybe we should make this like a three-book series so that we're all ready to battle in defense of free markets, which I do defend, even though they are truly weaponized. Let's see who we've got here just to say hi. Now I can't see my comments because I've got this PDF. Hello, yes, happy birthday. Thank you. It was my birthday on Sunday. Oh, the dogs. I know. I'm sorry. It's Arturo. We have workers here constantly. They're fixing patio and the fence and everything. Hello, JC. Hi. Okay, so let me see if I can get my special guy to bring me a drink so I don't have to clear my throat the entire time. So my son, my special guy, is home for the summer, and but he's really not competent to answer the door or deal with the dog. He's very high functioning, but he doesn't have my back when it comes to this stuff. Let me just check in with him. All right, guys, let's get on with the show. Okay. Can you still hear this? Can you hear this dog? Can you still hear him? Anyway, whatever. I'm just carrying on. Let's just carry on. All right. The law. The law perverted. The law, and in its wake, all the collective forces of the nation. The law, I say. You can't. Brucey, I can hear the dog and I like it. You just have to get Zen because he does this a lot. Like, this is why he was literally on death row. He was hours away from euthanized because he was in a shelter doing that the whole time. And they were just like, this guy's got to go. He's been better, but there are people at my house working. Anyway, the law perverted the law, and in its wake, all the collective forces of the nation. The law, I say, not only diverted from its proper direction, but made to pursue one entirely contrary. The law become the tool of every kind of avarice, instead of being its check. The law, guilty of that very iniquity which it was its mission to punish. Truly, this is a serious fact, if it exists, and one to which I feel bound to call the attention of my fellow citizens. I'm reading this on the day that Trump decided to federalize the DC police force or whatever he's saying. And of course, if you're listening back to this years from now, this may be the anniversary of the beginning of martial law. We do not know, but let us talk about the perversion of law, timeless as it seems to be. Bastiat continues. We hold from God the gift that, as far as we are concerned, contains all others: life, physical, intellectual, and moral life. But life cannot support itself. He who has bestowed it has entrusted us with the care of supporting it, of developing it, and of perfecting it. To that end, he has provided us with a collection of wonderful faculties. Thank you, sweetie. He has plunged us into the midst of a variety of elements. It is by the application of our faculties to these elements that the phenomena of assimilation and of appropriation, by which life pursues the circle that has been assigned to it, are realized. The phenomena of assimilation and of appropriation, okay, that the circle of life are realized. Okay, yeah, I mean, eating, right? Existence, faculties, assimilation. In other words, personality, liberty, and property. This is man. It is of these three things. There's so much in that that we naturally are in the circle of life, have assimilation and appropriation. That's what we have to have. That is the nature of our beings. And that is the essence of man, our existence, our faculties, and our assimilation, our personality, our liberty, and our property. Very, very succinct. It is of these three things that it may be said, apart from all demagogic subtlety, that they are anterior and superior to all human legislation, before and above all human legislation. It is, and that's how they got us to agree to the law, by recognizing this, and they still do that today. Self-defense is they always end up saying, "We're doing this for self-defense. We're nationalizing the police for self-defense. We're making you wear a mask for our self-defense. We're invading Syria." Like, I can't even whatever. They get us terrorist attacks, and then they can say it's self-defense. They do that because we won't let go of this obvious, self-evident truth. It is not because men have made laws that personality, liberty, and property exist. On the contrary, it is because personality, liberty, and property exist beforehand that men make laws. What then is law? As I have said elsewhere, it is the collective organization of the individual right to lawful defense. Yes, self-defense is the only right. I coined that. I'm not sure it's true, but I think it could be pretty true. Nature, or rather God, has bestowed upon every one of us the right to defend his person, his liberty, and his property, since these are the three constituent or preserving elements of life. Elements, each of which is rendered complete by the others, and that cannot be understood without them. For what are our faculties but the extension of our personality? And what is property but an extension of our faculties? If every man has the right of defending, even by force, his person, his liberty, and his property, a number of men have the right to combine together to extend, to organize a common force to provide regularly for this defense. But funny enough, I will add that our laws prevent that a lot of times. You really aren't allowed to do that. we have not only allowed our agents to have that right, it seems that the way they've abused it, it has been alienated from us. Collective right then has its principle, its reason for existing, its lawfulness in individual right, and the common force cannot rationally have any other end or any other mission than that of the isolated forces for which it is substituted. Let's read that again. Collective right has as its principle, its reason for existing, individual right. The common force cannot rationally have any other end or any other mission than that of the isolated forces for which it is substituted. Yes, so its mandate is to protect individual rights. Its mandate is not to protect its own self, which is simply an extension of that right and nothing more. Okay. Thus, as the force of an individual cannot lawfully touch the person, the liberty, or the property of another individual, for the same reason, the common force cannot lawfully be used to destroy the person, the liberty, or the property of individuals or of classes, groups of people. For this perversion of force would be, in one case as in the other, in contradiction to our premises. For who will dare to say that force has been given to us not to defend our rights, but to annihilate the equal rights of our brethren? And if this be not true of every individual force acting independently, how can it be true of the collective force, which is only the organized union of isolated forces? Nothing, therefore, can be more evident than this. The law is the organization of the natural right of lawful defense. It is the substitution of collective for individual forces, for the purpose of acting in the sphere in which they have a right to act, of doing what they have a right to do, to secure persons, liberties, and properties, and to maintain each in its right, so as to cause justice to reign over all. I mean, that paragraph would be, I wouldn't be surprised if I heard that word for word from my father. And when I'm thinking about it, his father gave it to him. I believe his father was born like in 1901 or 1900. I know, isn't that insane? Which would mean, it was only 50 years. It's like us reading something that was written in 1975. Okay. And if a people established upon this basis were to exist, it seems to me that order would prevail among them in their acts as well as in their ideas. He must have really taken courage when casting his eyes to America. When did de Tocqueville write Democracy in America? Funny name. Before this, but in the 1800s, I think. And so maybe the French were casting about for the truth in practice. It seems to me that such a people would have the most simple, the most economical, the least oppressive, the least to be felt, the most restrained, the most just, and consequently the most stable government that could be imagined, whatever its political form might be. Stable. Yes, I used to say this about the Middle East 15 years ago. We violate sovereignty over there. We violate the fundamental law. So they are not going to obey it anymore. So when you scalped Gaddafi, Assad had to fight till the end, because when you violate the foundational law, people can't count on it. They're not going to be the suckers. They're not going to wait around. For under such an administration, everyone would feel that he possessed all the fullness as well as all the responsibility of his existence. So long as personal safety was ensured, so long as labor was free, and the fruits of labor secured against all unjust attacks, no one would have any difficulties to contend with in the state. When prosperous, we should not, it is true, have to thank the state for our success. But when unfortunate, we should no more think of taxing it with our disasters than our peasants think of attributing to it the arrival of hail or of frost. Oh my gosh, how prescient all of that is. We should know it only by the inestimable blessing of safety. It may further be affirmed that, thanks to the non-intervention of the state in private affairs, our wants and their satisfactions would develop themselves in their natural order. We should not see poor families seeking for literary instruction before they were supplied with bread. Okay, let's read that again. May further be affirmed that thanks to the non-intervention of the state in private affairs, our wants and their satisfactions would develop themselves in their natural order. This makes so much sense. Like, stop. I just read this long article in today's journal about how Apple and Google and all that have agreed to spend billions of dollars in the Bay Area on affordable housing. I'm thinking you just have to pay people a living wage, whatever that means. And then they can live there and support you. But my guess is that they're going to give that money, but it'll be matched by the government or whatever. And then they can have their cafeteria workers paying half the rent they otherwise would pay. Or however, whatever scam works. But in a free market, if those people couldn't support themselves in that area because they don't have the skill set for the crazy high rents, they would leave. And then maybe some of those businesses would relocate. It's just 100% agreed. We should not see poor families seeking for literary instruction before they were supplied with bread. We should not see towns peopled at the expense of rural districts, nor rural districts at the expense of towns. We should not see those great displacements of capital, of labor, and of population that legislative measures occasion. Displacements that render so uncertain and precarious the very sources of existence, and thus enlarge to such an extent the responsibility of governments. So it just enlarges the responsibility of government, but it makes things precarious. Unhappily, law is by no means confined to its own sphere, nor is it merely in some ambiguous and debatable views that it has left its proper sphere. It has done more than this. It has acted in direct opposition to its proper end. It has destroyed its own object. It has been employed in annihilating that justice which it ought to have established, in effacing amongst rights that limit which it was its true mission to respect. It has placed the collective force in the service of those who wish to traffic without risk and without scruple in the persons, the liberty, and the property of others. It has converted plunder into a right, that it may protect it, and lawful defense into a crime, that it may punish it. Oh my gosh, it is so, so true. And that thing about without risk, that's the whole reason. I hate to use the word capitalism, like these cronies, corporatists, whatever, globalists capture the government. They want to make sure that their returns are not at risk or are juiced so much by massive AI investment from the government, the taxpayer, alongside them, and then they get the returns. I mean, that is a way sweetens the pot of the risk return payout assessment. Anyway, how has this perversion of law been accomplished, and what has resulted from it? The law has been perverted through the influence of two very different causes: naked greed and misconceived philanthropy. Let us speak of the former. Self-preservation and development is the common aspiration of all men, in such a way that if everyone enjoyed the free exercise of his faculties and the free disposition of their fruits, social progress would be incessant, uninterrupted, inevitable. And think about this. This guy's writing in 1850. You know, all the prosperity, the wealth, the comfort, the resources that we have now because of even hobbled the productivity has led us to. This guy is saying that when the poverty around him had to have been of a much deeper quality, if not quantity, but also probably quantity. But there is also another disposition which is common to them. This is to live and to develop when they can at the expense of one another. This is no rash imputation emanating from a gloomy, uncharitable spirit. History bears witness to the truth of it by the incessant wars, the migrations of races, sectarian oppressions, the universality of slavery, the frauds in trade, and the monopolies with which its annals abound. Migrations of races. I mean, I think he's talking about that being a function of this corrupt government. This fatal disposition has its origin in the very constitution of man, in that primitive and universal and invincible sentiment that urges it towards its well-being and makes it seek to escape pain. Man can only derive life and enjoyment from a perpetual search and appropriation. That is, from a perpetual application of his faculties to objects or from labor. This is the origin of property. But also he may live and enjoy by seizing and appropriating the productions of the faculties of his fellow men. This is the origin of plunder. Who was it who defined it as the political means of gaining wealth and the economic means of gaining wealth? I think it was the guy with the Spanish name, maybe. Okay, now labor being in itself a pain and man being naturally inclined to avoid pain, it follows, and history proves it, that wherever plunder is less burdensome than labor, it prevails. And neither religion nor morality can, in this case, prevent it from prevailing. Interesting. So if plunder is less burdensome, religion and morality is not going to prevent it from prevailing. When does plunder cease then? When it becomes more burdensome and more dangerous than labor. It is very evident that the proper aim of law is to oppose the fatal tendency to plunder with the powerful obstacle of collective force, that all its measures should be in favor of property and against plunder. And funny enough, if you do that, if you do what he said in the beginning was that the political activities is a waste of resources, as a diversion. But if you put your activities towards earning and growing and increasing productivity, the labor becomes less arduous because that's what people put their effort into, labor-saving devices, because people hate work. So it works both ways. Keep plunder from dominating, and you get easier labor, as well as labor being not just relative, but absolutely easier. But the law is made generally by one man or by one class of men. And as law cannot exist without the sanction and the support of a preponderant force, it must finally place this force in the hands of those who legislate. This inevitable phenomenon, combined with the fatal tendency that we have said exists in the heart of man, explains the almost universal perversion of law. It is easy to conceive that instead of being a check upon injustice, it becomes its most invincible instrument. It is easy to conceive that, according to the power of the legislator, it destroys for its own profit, and in different degrees, it does destroy, and in different degrees amongst the rest of the community, personal independence by slavery, liberty by oppression, and property by plunder. So it replaces independence with slavery, liberty by oppression, and property by plunder. It is in the nature of men to rise against the injustice of which they are the victims. When therefore plunder is organized by law for the profit of those who perpetrate it, all the plundered classes tend, either by peaceful or revolutionary means, to enter in some way into the manufacturing of laws. These classes, according to the degree of enlightenment at which they have arrived, may propose to themselves two very different ends. Yes, when they thus attempt the attainment of their political rights, either they may wish to put an end to lawful plunder, or they may desire to take part in it. This was the quote I was looking for. Woe to the nation where this latter thought prevails amongst the masses, at the moment when they, in their turn, seize upon the legislative power. Up to that time, lawful plunder has been exercised by the few upon the many, as is in the case with countries where the right of legislating is confined to a few hands. But now it has become universal, and the equilibrium is sought in universal plunder. The injustice that society contains, instead of being rooted out of it, is generalized. Gosh, it reminds me of Makers of the Modern Mind. Like, that's what they wanted, like Rousseau. As soon as the injured classes have recovered their political rights, their first thought is not to abolish plunder. This would suppose them to possess enlightenment, which they cannot have, but to organize against the other classes and to their own detriment a system of reprisals, as if it was necessary, before the reign of justice arrives, that all should undergo a cruel retribution, some for their iniquity and some for their ignorance. Shouts out to Byron. He I had paraphrased this once a long time ago, and he said, you have to find the quote, the passage. And I looked and I could not find it, but here it is. And it's interesting. That they should undergo a cruel retribution. That is what is the basis of what appears to be a turning of the tables now. Although I, of course, think that it's really the same ruling class that's making it look like there's a turning of the tables. Like Marx was paid by capitalists because they knew the turning of the tables might come, and they wanted to make sure they controlled it. But it's, I think he's right. It's natural. People are jumping on board with it, to their shame, I would say. It would be impossible, therefore, to introduce into society a greater change and a greater evil than this, the conversion of the law into an instrument of plunder. What would be the consequences of such a perversion? It would require volumes to describe them all. We must content ourselves with pointing out the most striking. In the first place, it would efface from everybody's conscience the distinction between justice and injustice. It's so freaking true. That's why we have this stupid expression, social justice. How can there be social injustice when only individuals can suffer? It doesn't work that way, and I remember the first time I was like, "What is this crap?" It was Do the Right Thing, Spike Lee, and I was like, "They're doing the wrong thing. They're punishing an innocent person." Anyway, like the pizza guy didn't kill Radio Ramin. Anyway, no society can exist unless the laws are respected to a certain degree. But the safest way to make them respected is to make them respectable. Big snaps, Bastiat. Big snaps. When law and morality are in contradiction to each other, the citizen finds himself in the cruel alternative of either losing his moral sense or of losing his respect for the law. Two evils of equal magnitude between which it would be difficult to choose. That's what I'm saying about the Middle East. That's what happened. That's what happened. And I had a caller once who told me that. He said, he was like Egyptian or something, or some North African. And he said when JFK was in office, like they had so much, oh, he must have been old, so much hope. Like America was, and who told that story about when he was he was like a diplomat or whatever. He used to walk around, and if he was American, people would pull over, like let him sit in the front seat, give him a ride, whatever. And now it changed so that America was held in contempt, and it's because I think we fail to respect sovereign law. That's what American exceptionalism means. It's not American extraordinariness. It's American exceptionalism, and the exception is to the law of sovereignty. Anyway, so it is so much in the nature of law to support justice that in the minds of the masses, they are one and the same. There is in all of us a strong disposition to regard what is lawful as legitimate, so much so that many falsely derive all justice from law. It is sufficient then for the law to order and sanction plunder that it may appear to many consciences just and sacred. Slavery, protection, and monopoly find defenders, not only in those who profit by them, but in those who suffer by them. Manufacturing advocacy. That's what I call that. Slavery, protection, and monopoly find defenders not only in those who profit by them, but in those who suffer by them. If you suggest a doubt as to the morality of these institutions, it is said directly, you are a dangerous experimenter, a utopian, a theorist, a despiser of the laws. You would shake the basis upon which society rests. Isn't that what the report from Iron Mountain was all about? Peace. Oh my gosh, that would be awful. If you lecture upon morality or political economy, official bodies will be found to make this request to the government. And he shows a quote. I don't know what it's from. The General Council of Manufacturers, Agriculture, and Commerce, 6th of May, 1850. So he just pulled this out of like that day's newspaper, probably. That henceforth science be taught not only with sole reference to free exchange, to liberty, property, and justice, as has been the case up to the present time, but also and especially with reference to the facts and legislation, contrary to liberty, property, and justice, that regulate French industry. That in public lecterns salaried by the Treasury, the professor abstain rigorously from endangering in the slightest degree the respect due to the laws now in force. Okay. I'm not really sure I understood the wording in the first part, but I definitely get what he's saying. Do not let the teachers who are paid by the government impugn in any way laws that support French industry, it looks like. Okay, so that if a law exists that sanctions slavery or monopoly, oppression or plunder in any form whatever, it must not even be mentioned. For how can it be mentioned without damaging the respect that it inspires? Still further, oh yeah, so you can't talk about it because everyone would know what it meant. Still further, morality and political economy must be taught in connection with this law. That is, under the supposition that it must be just only because it is law. Another effect of this deplorable perversion of the law is that it gives to human passions and to political struggles, and in general to politics, properly so called, an exaggerated importance. I could prove this assertion in 1,000 ways, but I shall confine myself by way of an illustration to bringing it to bear upon a subject which has of late occupied everybody's mind: universal suffrage. Whatever may be the thought of it by the adepts of the school of Rousseau, which professes to be very far advanced, but which I consider 20 centuries behind, universal suffrage, taking the word in its strictest sense, is not one of those sacred dogmas with respect to which examination and doubt are crimes. So universal suffrage, really, if you want to take it in the strictest sense, the UK is marching towards that. Did they pass that voting age of 16? My son, who just handed me the what he calls a cold one, they would not take his right to vote away. I'm responsible for everything, marriage, money, everything that he does. I have authority over it, but I can't tell him how to vote. And I don't actually, because it doesn't matter. I live in California, even if it mattered anywhere. But that's universal suffrage. Suffrage isn't just women, it's universal suffrage. And I'm for extremely restricted suffrage. Or at least suffrage with integrity, but really restricted suffrage. I don't feel the plunderers should have a vote over the plundered, for example, over the property of the plundered. Whatever. I'm sure he'll get to all of it. Whatever may be thought of it. Yep, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, but even so, it's saying like examination and doubt are crimes when it comes to questioning the tenet of universal suffrage. I mean, this is nothing new. He says they are not crimes, or should not be. They are not. Serious objections may be made to this strict universal suffrage. In the first place, the word universal conceals a gross sophism. There are in France 36 million inhabitants. To make the right of suffrage universal, 36 million electors should be reckoned. The most extended system reckons only 9 million. 3 persons out of 4 then are excluded. And more than this, they are excluded by the 4th. Upon what principle is this exclusion founded? Upon the principle of incapacity. Universal suffrage then means universal suffrage of those who are capable. In point of fact, who are the capable? Are age, sex, and judicial condemnations the only conditions to which incapacity is to be attached? So he's talking about felony disenfranchisement, age, and sex. On taking a nearer view of the subject, we may soon perceive the reason why the right of suffrage depends upon the presumption of incapacity. The most extended system differing from the most restricted in the conditions on which this incapacity depends, and which constitutes not a difference in principle, but in degree. All right, I think we'll understand it better if we move on. This motive is that the elector does not stipulate for himself, but for everybody. If, as the Republicans of the Greek and Roman tone pretend, the right of suffrage had fallen to the lot of everyone at his birth, it would be an injustice to adults to prevent women and children from voting. Why are they prevented? Because they are presumed to be incapable. Yikes. And why is incapacity a reason for exclusion? Because the elector does not reap alone the responsibility of his vote. Because every vote engages and affects the community at large. Because the community has a right to demand some assurances as regards the acts upon which its well-being and its existence depend. I might make a note about female suffrage. First of all, some idiots voted that in, and they weren't females. So the vote can't be trusted to anyone if you are against female suffrage. I'm kind of against all suffrage. But I will say in the defense of women that the 2 best presidents, arguably the 2 best presidents of the United States, and I'm literally thinking back. Patrick Henry was not a president. Uh, Harding and Coolidge, arguably, as things got more complicated, they stood their ground better than Thomas Jefferson, who bought Louisiana Purchase. They were maybe both elected in a total landslide, but Coolidge may have had the greatest landslide of any president. And those two were immediately after women's suffrage and turned us back from Wilson, I guess. I'll have to brush up on that, but it's a pretty impressive statistic. Now, I would say it's because the women had their heads screwed on right because they hadn't been propagandized the way they are now. And anyway, but so they're not totally, even if they just vote the way their husbands told them to at the time, it worked out. Anyway, I don't know. I know what might be said in answer to this. I know what might be objected, but this is not the place to settle a controversy of this kind. What I wish to observe is this, that this same controversy, in common with the greater part of political questions that agitates, excites, and unsettles the nations, would lose almost all its importance if the law had always been what it ought to be. In fact, yes, it doesn't matter. That's what I've always said, like the immigration thing. It doesn't matter if they come in and vote, if we would just adhere to the Constitution. But we don't. We've become a democracy, and they don't understand it. And yes, it's true. If you just stuck to the law, it wouldn't matter. In fact, wow, this guy just speaks to me over 175 years of time. He speaks to me. In fact, if law were confined to causing all persons, all liberties, and all properties to be respected, if it were merely the organization of individual right and individual defense, if it were the obstacle, the check, the chastisement opposed to all oppression, to all plunder, is it likely that we should dispute much as citizens on the subject of the greater or lesser universality of suffrage? Is it likely that it would compromise the greatest of advantages, the public peace? Is it likely that the excluded classes would not quietly wait for their turn? Is it likely that the enfranchised classes would be very jealous of their privilege? And is it not clear that the interest of all being one and the same, some would act without much inconvenience to the others? Yeah, understand it. And then you just vote for the administrators, really. But look what happens. We voted for an administrator, an executive, and lo, he legislates. So this is a great one. Let me see. This is just flying by. Let's see how much more we can get out. But if the fatal principle should come to be introduced that under pretense of organization, regulation, protection, or encouragement, the law may take from one party in order to give to another, help itself to the wealth acquired by all the classes, that it may increase that of one class, whether that of the agriculturalists, the manufacturers, the ship owners, or artists and comedians, then certainly in this case, there is no class which may not try, and with reason, to place its hand upon the law, that would not demand with fury its right of election and eligibility, and that would overturn society rather than not obtain it. Yes, they want it because it's powerful, and it's powerful because it's been corrupted, bastardized. Even beggars and vagabonds will prove to you that they have an incontestable title to it. Of course, that's why you don't need ID to vote, because beggars and vagabonds do not have IDs. This was a preposterous notion to this guy, but that's where we are. They will say, and this is like I don't think this is a real quote. I think he's saying what they would say. We never buy wine, tobacco, or salt without paying the tax. And a part of this tax is given by law in perquisites and gratuities to men who are richer than we are. Others make use of the law to create an artificial rise in the price of bread, meat, iron, or cloth. Since everybody traffics in law for his own profit, we should like to do the same. We should like to make it produce the right to assistance, which is the poor man's plunder. To effect this, we ought to be electors and legislators, that we may organize on a large scale alms for our own class, as you have organized on a large scale, protection for yours. Don't tell us that you will take our cause upon yourselves and throw to us 600,000 francs to keep us quiet, like giving us a bone to pick. We have other claims, and at any rate, we wish to stipulate for ourselves as other classes have stipulated for themselves. How is this argument to be answered? Yes, as long as it is admitted that the law may be diverted from its true mission, that it may violate property instead of securing it, everybody will be wanting to manufacture law, either to defend himself against plunder or to organize it for his own profit. The political question will always be prejudicial, predominant, and absorbing. In a word, there will be fighting around the door of the legislative palace. The struggle will be no less furious within it. To be convinced of this, it is hardly necessary to look at what passes in the chambers in France and in England. It is enough to know how the question stands. Is there any need to prove that this odious perversion of law is a perpetual source of hatred and discord, that it even tends to social disorganization? Look at the United States. There is no country in the world where the law is kept more within its proper domain. A moment of silence for the United States, which is to secure to everyone his liberty and his property. Therefore, there is no country in the world where social order appears to rest upon a more solid basis. Nevertheless, even in the United States, there are two questions, and only two, that from the beginning have endangered political order. And what are these two questions? That of slavery and that of tariffs. That is precisely the only two questions in which, contrary to the general spirit of this republic, law has taken the character of a plunderer. Slavery is a violation, sanctioned by law, of the rights of the person. Protection is a violation perpetrated by the law upon the rights of property. And certainly it is very remarkable that, in the midst of so many other debates, this double legal scourge, the sorrowful inheritance of the old world, should be the only one which can and perhaps will cause the rupture of the Union. Indeed, the two biggest scourges in America at that time, the United States, were tariffs and slavery. And it's funny because you can go back and forth with the tariff question, like if you read John Coleman, but we don't need them. We don't need to nurture industry. Indeed, a more astounding fact in the heart of society cannot be conceived than this, that law should have become an instrument of injustice. And if this fact occasions consequences so formidable to the United States, where there is but one exception, what must it be with us in Europe, where it is a principle, a system? And there are absolutely no breaks in this. And we're going to have to let's read one more page. Mr. Montalembert, adopting the thought of a famous proclamation of Mr. Carlier, said, "We must make war against socialism." And by socialism, according to the definition of Mr. Charles Dupin, he meant plunder. But what plunder did he mean? For there are two sorts, extra-legal and legal plunder. I think this is the beginning of a whole new segment, even though there's no freaking chapters. So I'm gonna end it there. I guess call that a tease. We are going to move into what type of abomination is socialism. But that was great. That was so riveting. I was riveted the entire time. We're a third of the way through it. So this is a very, very compact little work. Excellent, excellent stuff. I feel sad. I want to keep going, but I don't think I could. I just don't think I can. I can't read it forever. Um, so thanks so much for coming. And if you've never heard my show before, people are liking this. So maybe you're new to the show. I do other stuff. I do interviews. After the summer's over, I'm going to bring back my news reels where if I have any original observation about the news of the week, I will share it with you. Tends to have some prescience value. Anyway, so hello, Michael Schaefer. It's awesome to see you. And with that, I shall bid you adieu. Thank you all for coming.